So this is Michael A. Dufresne, and he was born March 15th, 1966. He served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and his highest rank achieved was Staff Sergeant. And the date and place of this interview is Davis, California. The interviewers are Owen Fulmer and myself, Nicholas Harder, and we knew Mr. Dufresne. He was our 7th grade history teacher. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress.
So our first question is, what were you doing before you entered service?
I was teaching full-time here at Holmes in Davis School District.
Okay, and why did you decide to sign up for the National Guard?
Years ago when I first joined, my dad was in the National Guard down in Southern California. He had about 8 years before he could earn a retirement, and he was deciding to kind of hang it up. And I just got out of high school, and I thought, nah, I like hanging with my dad, so I joined the same unit he was in. He was sergeant first class. He was a motor sergeant for a tank unit right in the town I lived in. So I went to basic training when I was right after high school, and in '86, and I became an armor crewman. Came back and worked in the same company he was in for the National Guard. So, and then we had several good years together, and then I transferred to college, and then he stayed in the Guard and earned his retirement. I went up here and went different directions with the Guard.
So what did you do for the National Guard before you went to Iraq?
I was in a transportation company in Sacramento, and we drove medium transportation trucks, tractor trailers. Okay. So if called on, we could haul freight, different types of freight, vehicles, variety of different loads.
And that was how often exactly?
1 week in a month and 2 weeks out of the year somewhere, usually in the summer.
Can you tell us about your training camp and early days of training?
Before going overseas or basic training?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Basic training was, it's a total wake-up call as a 19-year-old, sergeant screaming at you. And it's more of a head game than anything else as soon as you wrap your mind around the fact that they're there to, build you up after they take you down. Physically, I got in great shape, learned a lot of stuff about tactics and warfare, and then learn how to be a crew member on a tank, which was a lot of fun. Then came back from basic training, and then I served in many different roles throughout the National Guard, because as soon as you move from one area of the country to the other, you might find yourself in a community that has a unit, but you don't have the military job that that unit has, so you get trained on new military jobs. So I changed military jobs 4 or 5 times while I was in the Guard. Finally become a truck driver at the end. And then the training to get over to Iraq was a little bit different in that we were already soldiers. So we went with our units, we had to get blended with another unit. So we got used to a bunch of different guys, but then we were training on different vehicles that we never had before, much larger vehicles. We had to train driver's training, and we had to train about the techniques used to, bring dead tanks onto our trailers, and we had to hoist, use cables to pull them on and off. So it was long and tedious at times before we were activated, because National Guardmen, they come with a variety of different skills, and they're not in the military every single day, so their skill sets kind of get a little rusty. So it took a little longer to get ready to go, and they weren't exactly sure how they're going to use the Guard early in the war, early in the campaign. So, part of our training was at Camp Robertstown. It's a military base down in Paso Robles, and we were there for about 4 months of training before we left. We also went over to Port Louis, Washington for our out process before we went overseas.
So the main character in our novel, he was actually also a National Guardsman. And when he went to Iraq, he discovered that a lot of the units that they would blend with, like the Army or the Marines, they sort of looked down on National Guardsmen, and they didn't have a lot of good things to say. So did you have a similar experience? Or?
Similar, totally similar. We were nasty guardsmen, dirtbags. We were called dirtbags. We actually came with a lot more skills than a lot of the regular Army folks had, because they were just so much younger. The average age in our unit was like 35. We had 270 people in the unit. And then we joined units with kids right out of high school, you know, maybe 19, 20-year-old, and they knew the one job. They were trained how to drive a truck. They got activated overseas. They know how to drive a truck. But then they're sitting next to the National Guard, who, like in my instance, I was taught how to do 4 or 5 different military jobs before I got there. Plus, I have a college education, and I'm much older, so I've had world experience. The worst experience we ever had, and it really actually put us in danger at a couple of points, where we would go to an elite force, let's say the 4th ID Infantry Division, or the 1st ID, or even the 82nd Airborne, 101st, and they needed support transporting stuff, because that's not their job, that's our job, to transport stuff. So we would go into their units, and they were just about to out-process out of the country, and they're ready to redeploy back to wherever they're going, and they refused to have a National Guard staff sergeant or sergeant lead a convoy of all their equipment out of country, because they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have a National Guardsman do it. So in one instance, we showed up at a group to take them out of country. We knew the route to leave country. It wouldn't be very difficult at all. With their insistence, they said we were going to have this lieutenant in the Army lead the convoy out. And he looked at a whole bunch of maps, and he picked what he thought was the best route. And long story short, what should have taken, for one day, what should have taken about 5 hours, took us about 12 hours. And we were shot at in the middle of the night. We had damage to our equipment because it took us in a long route. And it was all because they were hell-bent on having them lead the convoy, not one of us. So it's a perfect example right there, how they treated us. Another example is when we were laterally transferred from our unit in Kuwait, and we were transferred to Crete, which is Saddam Hussein's hometown. We got in there and we were backfilling a regular Army unit that was losing members because they were being transferred to different units, and they were being, like, if they had an ETS, which means that your service in the military is done, they could leave the country, they could leave the theater of war. National Guard couldn't do that. We had people that retired just before we left. We had people that their contracts ended, but we were on lockstop. We couldn't leave. So when we had to backfill this unit because new regular Army troops were not choosing to join a unit that's overseas in Iraq. So we had to fill their trucks with drivers because they didn't have enough drivers anymore to actually be effective in the military. So we were blended right into their regular Army unit. Again, they just looked at us as, oh, you're overweight, you're old, you don't know what your job is. And they were doing things the old, I don't know. They were working much harder. They weren't working very smart. They were working harder. So we introduced them to some shortcuts that we use to not jeopardize in safety, but to get the job done more efficiently. And they eventually appreciated our contribution, but it took them a while. So a couple of good examples there.